A young man helps an unconscious elderly man on the street. Later, a millionaire invites him to his mansion and reveals a secret from his past that will change his life. Michael Johnson didn't believe in luck. Since his father's death when he was only 5, life had taught him and his mother, Linda, that survival depended on hard work and resilience. They had no time to rely on chance or fortune. Working part-time at a local auto shop while juggling his engineering degree at the nearby university left Michael exhausted most days, but he pushed through it. All he wanted was to finish school and give his mother the better life she deserved. That afternoon, as he walked home from work, his mind was clouded with the same thoughts that often followed him. Deadlines, bills, the pressure of his studies, and the constant question, would things ever get easier? Lost in thought, he didn't immediately notice the elderly man walking a few steps ahead of him. Just as Michael was about to pass him, the man stumbled, his cane slipping from his grip, and he collapsed onto the hard pavement. Michael's body moved before his brain could catch up. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, crouching beside the man. The elderly gentleman was pale, his breathing shallow and labored. His hand trembled slightly as he tried to wave Michael off. I just lost my balance." "It's nothing serious," the man whispered, his voice weak. "Don't trouble yourself, young man." But Michael wasn't the kind of person to walk away. He glanced around the street, hoping someone else might help. But the busy passers-by continued their hurried routines, pretending not to notice the situation unfolding right in front of them. Michael frowned. "No way. You could be hurt. Let me help you up." The man shook his head weakly. "Really? I just need to sit for a moment. That's all." Ignoring the protest, Michael scanned the street until he spotted a nearby bench. He looped his arm under the old man's and gently helped him up. "Here, lean on me," Michael insisted, steadying the man as they shuffled slowly toward the bench. A young passerby saw Michael struggling and stepped forward. "Need a hand?" "Yeah, thanks," Michael said, grateful for the help. Together, they carefully settled the elderly man onto the bench. Michael crouched down again to meet the man's gaze. "Do you need me to call someone? Maybe an ambulance?" The old man gave a tired but appreciative smile. No ambulance. Just a little dizziness, probably low blood pressure." He fumbled weakly with the collar of his jacket, as if trying to catch his breath. "I'll be fine in a moment." Michael wasn't entirely convinced. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a bottle of water, and handed it to the man. "Here, drink this," Michael urged, his brow creased with concern. "It might help." The old man accepted the bottle with a grateful nod, taking a few careful sips. The color slowly returned to his face, though his hand still shook slightly. "Thank you, son," the man said, his voice more stable now. "You didn't have to stop." Michael shrugged modestly. "It was the least I could do. Couldn't just walk past you like everyone else." The old man studied Michael for a moment, as if trying to read the kind of person he was beyond the surface. There was something in Michael's expression, a blend of kindness and determination, that struck the elderly stranger. "You've got a good heart," the man said quietly. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Michael shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same. The man chuckled softly, a knowing look in his eyes. "Not as many as you think." "What's your name, young man?" "Michael Johnson," he answered, offering his hand for a firm shake. The older man grasped it, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who had just been sprawled out on the sidewalk. "William Anderson. It's a pleasure to meet you, Michael." Michael gave a polite smile. "Glad you're feeling better, Mr. Anderson." William leaned back against the bench, the faint trace of a smile still lingering on his face. "Thanks to you, I am. I won't forget this, you know." Michael stood up, brushing off his jeans. "Just make sure you get home safe, okay?" He hesitated for a moment, as if waiting to see if the man needed anything else, then gave a quick nod. "Take care, Mr. Anderson." With that, Michael turned to leave, his mind already beginning to shift back to the worries that had consumed him before. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that lingered. The sense that, somehow, this brief encounter was more significant than it seemed. He glanced back once to see William still seated on the bench, watching him with a curious glint in his eye. Michael didn't know it yet, but that fleeting act of kindness had set something into motion, a connection that would soon pull him into a world far beyond the life he thought he knew. The next day at the university, Michael recounted the strange encounter to his best friend, Daniel Miller. Daniel was the type of friend who always found humor in everything, even in the most mundane situations. Wait, Daniel said, holding up a hand to stop him mid-story. You're telling me you saved some old guy on the street and he didn't just say thanks. He introduced himself. Michael laughed, shaking his head. I didn't save him, man. He just needed a little help. Daniel grinned mischievously. Right, and now he's gonna put you in his will or something. Bet he's secretly a billionaire. Michael rolled his eyes but couldn't help laughing. Yeah, right. I just hope the guy made it home without falling again. Seriously, though, Daniel said, nudging Michael's shoulder. That was a good thing you did, Mike. Not everyone would stop like that. Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. It wasn't a big deal, but deep down, something about Daniel's words stuck with him. Maybe it was a big deal, just not in the way he expected. 2 days later, as Michael sat at the small kitchen table in his mother's modest home, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Hello? Michael speaking. A smooth, confident voice came through the line. Hello. Is this Michael Johnson? My name is Robert Anderson. I believe you met my father recently. William Anderson? Michael's brow furrowed, trying to place the name. Oh, yeah. I helped him out the other day. Is everything okay? Yes, he's doing much better now. Thanks to you, Robert said warmly. In fact, my father was very impressed by your kindness. He's been talking about it nonstop. Michael chuckled nervously, unsure of how to respond. I'm glad to hear that. My father would like to personally thank you, Robert continued. He's invited you to join us for dinner at our home this weekend. Just a small gesture of appreciation. Michael blinked, taken aback by the unexpected invitation. Dinner? I don't want to trouble anyone. It's no trouble at all, Robert assured him smoothly. We'd be honored to have you. Michael hesitated for a moment. Something about the invitation felt surreal, but there was also a sense of curiosity pulling at him. Okay, Michael finally said. I'd be happy to come. Great. I'll text you the address. We look forward to meeting you, Michael. As the call ended, Michael set his phone down, still trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. Dinner with William Anderson's family? The whole thing felt like something out of a movie, too strange to be real. He glanced across the room at his mother, who was busy folding laundry. You're not going to believe this, he muttered to himself, a small, bewildered smile creeping onto his face. And just like that, with a single phone call, the threads of Michael's ordinary life began to unravel, leading him toward a path he never could have imagined. And so fate, whether he believed in it or not, was about to tie his life to the powerful Anderson family in ways he never saw coming. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Michael's nerves were sharper than he expected. He pulled his old car into the long driveway and stared at the enormous mansion before him. The house towered over him, elegant and intimidating, with large arched windows that seemed to watch his every move. The sheer grandeur of the place left him slightly breathless. It was far removed from the life he knew, modest apartments, used furniture, and a constant juggling of bills. For a moment, he thought about turning around. What am I even doing here? But the thought of his mother's pride and the odd sense of connection he'd felt with William Anderson pushed him forward. He stepped out of the car, smoothed his shirt, and made his way to the front door. Before he could even knock, the heavy oak door swung open. Michael, welcome. Robert Anderson greeted him with a practiced smile, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his presence commanding but not unkind. Robert was the kind of man who radiated control, someone who expected things to go his way, and they usually did. Michael shook his hand. "Thank you for inviting me." Robert gestured for him to enter. "We're glad you could join us. My father has been looking forward to this evening." Michael stepped inside, trying not to gawk at the interior. Polished marble floors stretched beneath intricate chandeliers, and the walls were lined with tasteful artwork that seemed more expensive than his entire apartment. Before he could fully take in the opulence, William Anderson appeared in the foyer, moving toward him with surprising energy for a man his age. "Good to see you again, Michael," William said warmly, clasping his hand with both of his own. Michael offered a polite smile, though the grandeur of the surroundings made him feel out of place. "Good to see you too, Mr. Anderson." William chuckled. "Please call me William. We're glad you came." Robert gestured toward the hallway. "Come, everyone's waiting for you." The dining room was just as grand as the rest of the house. A long table stretched across the room, adorned with gleaming silverware and delicate crystal glasses. As Michael stepped inside, several pairs of eyes turned toward him, assessing him quietly. "Michael, this is my wife, Emily," Robert said, gesturing toward a tall, elegant woman seated at the table. Her smile was polite but distant, as if she were used to entertaining strangers, but not particularly interested in getting to know them. "Nice to meet you, Michael," she said, her voice smooth and measured. "Pleasure to meet you, too," Michael responded. "And our daughter, Sarah," Robert added, motioning toward the young woman next to Emily. Sarah was striking, not just because of her looks, but because of the intensity in her eyes. She studied Michael with open curiosity, as though trying to unravel him in a matter of seconds. "So, you're the one Grandpa's been talking about," Sarah said, offering him a small smile. "I've heard a lot about you." Michael felt his cheeks warm under her direct gaze. "I hope it was all good." "Mostly," she teased, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. Just as Michael was beginning to feel somewhat relaxed, another voice cut through the room. "And this," Robert continued, his tone shifting slightly, "is my brother, James." James leaned back in his chair with a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes sharp with skepticism. "So, you're the Good Samaritan," he muttered, lifting the glass in a mock toast. Michael forced a polite smile. "I guess so." Next to James sat a woman with dark, watchful eyes, Laura, his girlfriend. She said nothing, but the way she looked at Michael made him uneasy, as if she were studying a piece on a chessboard and planning her next move. "And that's Thomas," William added, nodding toward a man at the far end of the table. "He's an old friend of the family and our legal counsel." Thomas Brown gave Michael a brief, polite nod, but his expression was unreadable. His gaze lingered on Michael just a second too long, as though he were already filing away every word and gesture for future reference. "Nice to meet you, Michael," Thomas said smoothly, his voice carefully neutral. "Likewise," Michael replied, feeling as though he were under quiet scrutiny from all sides. The dinner began, and Michael did his best to follow the flow of conversation. Plates of food were passed around, and wine glasses clinked together in polite toasts. "So, Michael," Robert began, slicing into his meal, "William tells me you're studying engineering." "That's right," Michael answered, straightening in his chair. "Mechanical engineering. I've always been interested in how things work, so it just felt like the right path." Emily gave a polite nod. "Ambitious. And you work part-time as well?" "Yes," Michael confirmed, "at a local auto shop. It's not much, but it helps with expenses." "You must be very busy," Sarah remarked, tilting her head as she studied him. "School work, not much time left for anything else." Michael smiled, trying to downplay the strain. "I manage." "And what's the plan after graduation?" Thomas asked, swirling the wine in his glass. Michael hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. "Honestly, I'd love to work in product design or R&D, somewhere I can build things that actually make a difference." William's eyes gleamed with interest, and he leaned forward slightly. "That's an admirable goal." As the conversation flowed, Michael noticed the subtle tensions in the room. James barely spoke, except for the occasional sarcastic comment aimed in Michael's direction. Laura, silent and observant, never stopped watching him. Thomas listened carefully to every word, as if preparing to use the information later. But it was William's unwavering focus on Michael that unsettled him the most. The old man's interest seemed personal, almost as if he were searching for something beyond Michael's words. After the plates were cleared and dessert was served, William turned to Michael with a warm smile. "How about a walk, Michael? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Michael nodded, feeling a flicker of nervousness. "Sure." The two of them left the dining room and walked down a quiet hallway that led to William's study. The room was filled with bookshelves and old photographs, giving it a sense of history and importance. William gestured toward a leather chair. "Please sit." Michael sat down, feeling slightly out of place in the grand office. William took the seat across from him, resting his hands on the armrests as he studied Michael with quiet intensity. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did," William began, his voice calm but serious. "Most people wouldn't have stopped to help a stranger." Michael shook his head. "It wasn't a big deal, but it was to me," William replied firmly. "And that's why I wanted to offer you something more than just thanks." Michael frowned slightly, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "How would you feel about joining Anderson Tech as an intern?" William asked, his tone casual but his gaze sharp, as if testing Michael's reaction. Michael blinked, stunned. "An internship? At Anderson Tech?" William nodded. "I see potential in you, Michael. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Michael tried to process the offer, but it felt too surreal. I don't know what to say. This is a huge opportunity." William smiled kindly. "Take your time to think about it, but I believe you'd be a great fit." Michael hesitated for a moment, searching William's face for any sign of hidden motives. "Why me?" he finally asked. William's smile softened. "Because I trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me you're someone worth investing in." Michael swallowed hard, still grappling with the magnitude of what was happening. "Thank you. I'd be honored." William nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll arrange everything tomorrow." As Michael left the study, his mind raced with questions. An internship at Anderson Tech? It was the kind of opportunity that could change his life, but it also felt like stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. And as he rejoined the others in the dining room, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to take a turn he never saw coming. When Michael told his mother, Linda, about the opportunity William Anderson had offered, the joy on her face was impossible to miss. She pulled him into a tight hug, her voice cracking with emotion. "Michael, I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her arms still wrapped around him. This is the beginning of something great. I just know it." Michael hugged her back, feeling a mixture of excitement and uncertainty swirl in his chest. "I hope so, Mom. It feels like things are finally changing for us." Linda pulled back, wiping a tear from her eye, her smile wide and genuine. "Your father would be so proud of the man you become. I always knew you were meant for bigger things." Michael gave a small, awkward laugh. "Let's hope I don't screw it up." Linda shook her head, her expression serious. "You won't. Just be yourself, Michael. You've made it this far because of who you are, kind, hardworking, and smart. Don't forget that, no matter how different their world might seem." Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, the news of Michael's internship was not celebrated with the same enthusiasm. James sat on the edge of his leather couch, gripping a whiskey glass, so tightly it looked like it might shatter. "Why the hell is my father so interested in this kid?" he growled, tossing back the last of his drink. Laura sat across from him, legs crossed, watching James with a detached expression. "Maybe he sees something in Michael that he doesn't see in you," she said, her words sharp but deliberate. James shot her a venomous look. "That's not funny, Laura." "It wasn't a joke," Laura replied coolly, swirling the wine in her glass. "I think you should be careful with him. Your father's never taken to anyone this quickly, not even with Robert's kids. That should tell you something. James slammed his glass down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. I don't trust him, he muttered. There's something off about the whole thing. Laura leaned forward slightly, her gaze hardening. Then keep an eye on him. If Michael's planning to get comfortable in your family's business, it's best we know exactly what he's up to. Michael's first day at Anderson Tech marked the start of an entirely new chapter in his life. Sarah Anderson had been assigned to mentor him during his internship, and although he felt nervous at first, she quickly made him feel at ease. "Relax, Michael," she said, smiling as they sat down in her sleek, modern office. "I don't bite." Michael chuckled nervously. "I just didn't expect all of this so soon, but I'll do my best not to disappoint." "I'm sure you won't," Sarah replied, glancing at him from over her desk. "You'll be working closely with me on several ongoing projects. We got a lot of ground to cover, but I think you'll fit in just fine." Over the next few weeks, Michael threw himself into his work, determined to make a good impression. Sarah turned out to be a patient and insightful mentor. Her sharp mind and genuine curiosity about his ideas made her easy to talk to, and soon their conversations went beyond work. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if engineering didn't work out?" Sarah asked one evening after hours as they reviewed a project in her office. Michael leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Honestly, no. I never had a backup plan. This was always it. What about you? Law school and all. Was that your first choice?" Sarah shrugged, smiling slightly. "Not really. But once I started, I realized I like figuring out puzzles. Maybe it's in the family DNA." Michael smirked. "Figuring out puzzles? Or figuring out people?" "A little bit of both," she admitted with a playful grin. As they spent more time together, the walls between them gradually fell away. Their working relationship evolved into something closer to friendship, and there were moments when Michael wondered if it might even be the start of something more. But not everything at Anderson Tech was as smooth as it seemed on the surface. One afternoon, while reviewing routine financial reports, Michael noticed a series of irregularities in the numbers. The discrepancies were subtle, almost too subtle to catch, but they raised red flags. "Hey, Sarah," Michael said, his brow furrowed as he flipped through the documents. "These contracts, do these figures seem off to you?" Sarah leaned over his shoulder, scanning the data on the screen. After a few moments, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "You're right," she murmured. "These numbers don't add up. Someone's either really careless or deliberately hiding something." Michael tapped the screen, pointing to a section of the report. "It looks like funds are being funneled through shell contracts. Someone inside the company is skimming off the top." Sarah's face grew serious. "This is bad. Really bad." Michael nodded slowly. "We need to tell your grandfather. He should know about this." Before they could act, however, the office door swung open. James stood in the doorway, his arms crossed and a suspicious gleam in his eyes. "What are you two doing with those files?" he asked, his voice edged with irritation. Michael tensed but tried to keep his tone casual. "Just reviewing some data. Something caught our attention. That's all." James's jaw tightened. "Those files aren't your concern. Leave them to the people in charge." Sarah didn't back down. "We're just double-checking the numbers. Nothing wrong with that, is there?" James's gaze flickered between them, sharp and calculating. "Don't waste your time. Stick to what you're supposed to be doing." With that, he turned on his heel and left, slamming the door behind him. Michael exhaled slowly, exchanging a glance with Sarah. "That wasn't suspicious at all," he muttered under his breath. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. "He knows something. I can feel it." Michael nodded, his thoughts racing. "If James is involved in whatever's going on here, we need to be smart about this. We can't just come out and accuse him." Sarah's expression hardened. "We'll have to gather more evidence. And we can't let him know we're onto him. From that moment on, Michael and Sarah decided to keep their investigation secret. They met late at night, poring over documents and analyzing data in quiet corners of the office where no one could overhear them. Their shared sense of purpose brought them even closer, but it also made them realize how dangerous the situation had become. "You know," Sarah said one evening as they sat in the dim glow of a computer screen, "if James finds out what we're doing, he's not going to take it lightly." Michael gave a grim smile. "I didn't think he liked me much to begin with." Sarah snorted softly. "That's an understatement. But seriously, Michael, be careful. My brother doesn't play fair." "I figured that out," Michael replied, his voice low but determined. "But we can't stop now. Not until we know the truth." Despite the growing risks, neither of them was willing to back down. They knew they were treading on dangerous ground, but there was no turning back. Whatever secrets lay hidden within the company's contracts, they were determined to uncover them, even if it meant going up against James and whoever else might be involved. And so, with the shadows of suspicion growing darker around them, Michael and Sarah pressed forward, unaware that they were about to be pulled deeper into a dangerous game, one where the stakes would soon become far higher than they ever anticipated. A few days after Michael and Sarah's discovery, the results of the internal audit were in, and they were exactly what they had feared. James Anderson was the mastermind behind the fraudulent schemes. The siphoned funds, the altered contracts, everything pointed directly to him. The confrontation between William and his youngest son happened behind closed doors, but the walls of the Anderson mansion seemed to absorb the tension like a heavy fog. In the study, William paced behind his desk, his usually calm demeanor shattered by anger and disappointment. His face was stern, and when James walked in, his expression darkened further. James, still wearing the air of smug indifference he had carried all his life, leaned against the doorframe, hands shoved into his pockets as if the whole thing were just another minor inconvenience. "How could you betray your own family?" William demanded, his voice heavy with disbelief. James sneered. "Family? Don't make me laugh. The only family you've ever cared about is Robert and his perfect little wife and kids." William's jaw tightened. "This has nothing to do with Robert. This is about you, your actions, your choices. How could you do something like this?" James's smug facade cracked, giving way to years of buried resentment. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Why do you even care now? You never gave a damn about me. Robert got everything. The respect, the responsibility. And now you found a new golden boy in Michael." His voice dripped with venom as he spat the name. "There was never room for me." William's expression didn't waver, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You had every opportunity to prove yourself, James. But instead, you chose to tear down everything this family built." James's eyes flashed with frustration. "You think this is all on me? You pushed me aside from the start. I did what I had to do to survive in this family. By stealing from the company? By betraying us." William's voice hardened. "There is no excuse for what you've done." James stood in silence, his fists clenched at his sides. The confrontation ended not with a shout, but with a decision. "You're finished here, James," William said, his voice final. "You'll have no place in this family or this business again." James's removal, however, was just the beginning. As William worked to contain the damage within the company, a new storm was already brewing. Laura and Thomas, determined to salvage their positions and eliminate Michael as a threat, began laying out their scheme. "We have to make this look airtight," Laura whispered to Thomas one night over dinner at a secluded restaurant. William might have bought into Michael's good boy act, but it won't take much to make them doubt him. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a slow, calculating grin spreading across his face. "If we can make it look like Michael was involved in the frauds, William won't hesitate to cut him loose." Laura's lips curved into a cold smile. "Let's get to work." Together, they began fabricating evidence. False documents, manipulated spreadsheets, and email trails that linked Michael to the fraudulent contracts James had overseen. Thomas knew exactly which legal strings to pull to make everything appear legitimate, and Laura handled the rest with ruthless precision. When Michael was summoned to the Anderson mansion for an urgent meeting a few days later, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The tone of the message had been formal, almost cold. Something was wrong. In the study, the atmosphere was tense. William sat behind his desk, his expression grim. Robert stood by the window with his arms crossed, and Sarah sat stiffly on the couch, her face pale but determined. James was conspicuously absent, but Michael could feel the weight of the accusations before anyone even spoke. William cleared his throat. "Michael, we need to talk." Michael nodded, taking a seat. "What's going on?" Robert placed a folder on the desk in front of Michael. "We received some troubling information about you." Michael frowned as he opened the folder. Inside were documents, contracts he'd never seen before with his name attached, emails supposedly sent by him approving fraudulent transactions. His heart raced as he scanned the papers. "This isn't right," Michael muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't approve any of this." William's face was heavy with disappointment. "The evidence says otherwise." Sarah jumped in, her voice sharp. "These documents don't make sense, Grandpa. Michael wouldn't do this." Michael looked at William, pleading. "You know me. I wouldn't betray you." William rubbed his temples, clearly torn. "I want to believe you, Michael, but the evidence, it's overwhelming." Sarah's voice was firm. "We need to investigate further. Something isn't adding up." Despite William's disappointment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I'll give you a chance to explain yourself, but if you're lying..." He left the threat hanging in the air. Michael clenched his fists. He knew that whatever this was, it wasn't just an innocent mistake. It was a deliberate setup. Someone wanted him out, and they had gone to great lengths to make sure the accusations stuck. Michael wasted no time. He contacted Daniel, his best friend, and enlisted Sarah's help. Together, they launched their own investigation, determined to uncover the truth. "Who has access to the financial records?" Daniel asked, scrolling through a list of company employees on his laptop. "If someone planted this, they had to have inside knowledge." "It has to be Thomas and Laura," Sarah said, pacing the room. "They were already too close to James. And Thomas knows every legal loophole we have." Michael nodded. "We need to find something, anything, that ties them to this." For days, the trio combed through emails, security logs, and financial statements. The pieces began to fall into place. Sarah discovered discrepancies in the timestamps of the emails used to implicate Michael, messages supposedly sent from his account when he had been logged out. Daniel traced the origin of several forged documents to Thomas's personal email server, hidden behind layers of encryption. "This is it," Daniel whispered triumphantly, holding up his laptop. "We've got them." The final blow came when they unearthed more evidence of James's involvement, additional schemes that hadn't been detected in the initial audit. It was clear now, James hadn't just been running one fraud. He had been involved in multiple illegal activities, with Laura and Thomas as his co-conspirators. With everything in hand, Michael, Sarah, and Daniel returned to the Anderson mansion. This time, the meeting in William's study felt different. Michael's nerves were still there, but beneath them was a steely determination. William sat quietly as they presented their findings. The room was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling and Daniel's voice as he walked through the evidence step by step. When they finished, William leaned back in his chair, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. "You were telling the truth?" he whispered, almost to himself. Michael nodded. "I told you I didn't do it." William's eyes closed briefly, as if the weight of his mistakes was finally catching up to him. "Thomas and Laura, they betrayed us all." Robert, who had been silent until now, let out a slow exhale. "They've been manipulating us from the start." William's voice was heavy with regret. "I'll take care of it. Thomas and Laura will be handed over to the authorities. And James, he's done. For good." The following day, William acted swiftly. Thomas and Laura were arrested, their schemes exposed for all to see. James, stripped of his last chance at redemption, was officially cut off from the family and the company. After everything, William sat across from Michael in the quiet of his study. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his shoulders. "I was wrong about you, Michael," he said quietly. "We were all wrong. I hope you can forgive us." Michael looked at him for a long moment, the anger and hurt still fresh, but beneath it was a sense of relief. "I forgive you. I just want things to move forward." William smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "We will. But there's one more thing you need to know." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" William exhaled slowly. "It's about your past and who you really are." The family gathered in William Anderson's private study. Tension thick in the air. The silence stretched painfully, as if everyone sensed that something big was about to be revealed. William sat behind his large oak desk, his hands clasped together, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. His gaze traveled over each face in the room. Robert, Emily, Sarah, Michael, and Linda, before lingering on Michael with a peculiar softness. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had spent the last few weeks navigating fraud accusations, betrayal, and family politics, but something in the old man's expression told him that what was coming next would shake him more than anything he'd faced so far. William inhaled deeply, his voice low and measured. "There's something I need to tell you all. Something I should have said a long time ago." Robert's brow furrowed. "Dad, what's this about?" William leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk as if preparing to confess a great sin. "It's about Michael, and about the past. It's time you all knew the truth." Everyone in the room stilled. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, confusion and unease twisting inside him. He shot a glance toward his mother, Linda, who was sitting quietly in the corner. She looked tense, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her lips pressed together, as if she knew exactly where this was going. "Michael," William began, his voice heavy with emotion. "You are my grandson." The room seemed to freeze. No one moved, no one spoke. The words hung in the air, surreal and impossible to grasp. Michael blinked, as if trying to process what he had just heard. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah sat up straighter, her eyes wide. "Wait, what did you just say?" "You heard me." William's gaze was locked on Michael, unwavering. "You're my grandson. I'm your grandfather." Michael shook his head slowly, his mind reeling. "No, that can't be true." He turned toward Linda, searching for some kind of denial, some reassurance that what William had just said wasn't real. But his mother's expression only confirmed it. There was no shock, no disbelief on her face, only guilt. Linda's voice was soft when she finally spoke. "It's true, Michael." His throat felt dry, his pulse pounding in his ears. "How is that even possible?" William leaned back in his chair, looking older than he ever had before. "Before I married Robert's mother, I had a relationship with Linda. We were young, and it was complicated." His voice faltered for a moment, the regret in it unmistakable. "But when I left to start a new chapter of my life, I didn't know Linda was pregnant. I only found out much later." Too late. Michael's breath hitched, a wave of emotions crashing over him. "You knew? You knew and you just left?" Linda interjected, her voice trembling. "I tried to tell him, Michael. I wanted you to know your father's side of the family. But back then, things were different. William had already moved on, and I was scared. I thought it would be easier if we stayed out of each other's lives." Michael ran a hand through his hair, disbelief and anger bubbling to the surface. "So, all these years I've been struggling, Mom and I have been struggling, and you..." He turned to William, his voice thick with bitterness. "You were right there, living comfortably, without a clue that I even existed." "I didn't know, Michael," William said quietly, remorse deep in his voice. "And when I finally found out, I thought it was too late to make things right. I told myself it was better not to disrupt your life." Michael let out a bitter laugh. shaking his head. And now you think it's the right time? After everything? Sarah leaned forward, her hand resting gently on Michael's arm. I know this is a lot, Michael, but it makes sense now, doesn't it? The connection you felt with Grandpa, it wasn't just coincidence. Michael stared at her for a long moment, struggling to wrap his mind around the revelation. The pieces were starting to click into place, but that only made it harder to accept. I get it, Michael muttered, his voice low. You made mistakes. But what am I supposed to do with this? You think you can just tell me, and everything's going to be fine? He looked at William, his eyes filled with years of frustration and pain. You think that makes up for the years you weren't there? William's expression was solemn. No, I know I can't change the past, but I'd like to try to make things right now. If you'll let me. Robert, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. So, Michael is our brother's son, and you never told us? William looked at his eldest son with regret. I was trying to protect all of you, but in the end, I made things worse. Robert exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck as he processed the revelation. This changes everything. Michael gave a hollow laugh. No kidding. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at Michael. You've always belonged here, Michael, even before we knew. Now it's just official. Michael wanted to believe her, but the weight of the truth was too heavy to lift so quickly. It doesn't feel official. It feels like my whole life just got rewritten. Linda's voice broke through the tension, soft and filled with apology. I never wanted to hurt you, Michael. I did what I thought was best, even if it was the wrong choice. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breath. I need time to think about all of this. William gave him a small nod, understanding in his gaze. Take all the time you need, but know this, you're a part of this family now, and that's not going to change. Michael let out a shaky breath. We'll see. The meeting ended, but the aftermath lingered in every corner of the Anderson mansion. As the family slowly dispersed from the study, Michael remained seated, lost in thought. His mind swirled with conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, curiosity, and beneath it all, the faintest flicker of something unexpected. Belonging. Sarah lingered near the door, watching him carefully. Michael, she said softly, you don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just don't shut us out, okay? He gave her a tired nod. I'll try. As she left the room, Michael sat in silence, his thoughts spinning in endless circles. A part of him wanted to walk away from the Andersons and never look back. But another part, a quieter, more uncertain part, was starting to wonder if this was exactly where he was meant to be all along. The revelation that Michael was William Anderson's grandson hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. The room remained still, as if frozen in time, each person grappling with the weight of what had just been revealed. Michael sat stiffly in his chair, his mind spinning as he tried to grasp the impossible truth. This can't be real, he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. It felt like the ground beneath him had shifted, leaving him without footing. How? How is this even possible? Linda sat on the edge of her chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as though squeezing them would stop them from shaking. She knew the moment was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier. I never wanted to keep this from you, she said quietly, her voice laced with both guilt and regret. After your father died, I found out I was pregnant, but by the time I tried to reach William, she hesitated, glancing at the older man. He had already moved on. Michael blinked, struggling to make sense of it all. You never told me. His voice cracked under the weight of confusion, hurt, and betrayal. All these years, and you never said a word. Linda swallowed hard, her eyes pleading. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to disrupt your life, or his. I thought maybe it was better this way. William, sitting across the room, leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. There was a sorrowful gravity in his gaze as he looked at Michael, one that spoke of years of missed opportunities and choices that could never be undone. "If I had known," William said slowly, his voice rough with remorse, "I would have done things differently. I never wanted to abandon you or your mother. I didn't know you existed until it was too late." Michael clenched his fists on his thighs, a sharp, bitter laugh escaping him. "Too late," he echoed, shaking his head. "That's convenient, isn't it?" The silence that followed was heavy, the unspoken emotions swirling between them. Years of loneliness, guilt, regret, and anger crashing together like storm waves. Linda wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "Michael, I did the best I could with what we had. I thought maybe you'd be better off without knowing." Michael lowered his gaze to the floor, feeling as if his entire identity had been shaken loose. On one side was the life he had known, struggling alongside his mother, scraping by with hard work and determination. On the other side was his family, this legacy he never even knew was his, waiting just out of reach all these years. "I don't know how to deal with this," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Sarah, seated beside him, reached out and touched his arm lightly. The simple gesture grounded him in the moment, pulling him from the storm of his thoughts. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," she said softly. "And you don't have to do it alone." Michael glanced at her, appreciating the quiet reassurance in her eyes. He didn't know how or when it happened, but Sarah had become a steady presence in his life, someone he trusted without hesitation. And right now, that trust was the only thing keeping him from unraveling completely. William cleared his throat, his gaze steady but laced with regret. "I know I can't change the past, Michael. I wish I could." He leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, as if he were holding himself together by sheer willpower. "But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I'd like to try to make things right." Michael exhaled, the weight of the words settling heavily on his chest. He wanted to lash out, to scream at both of them for the years he had spent wondering where he belonged. But the anger didn't feel as sharp as he expected. Beneath it, there was something else, something softer, though no less complicated. He took a slow breath, trying to sort through the chaos in his mind. This is a lot to process." Linda leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "I know, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere." Michael looked from Linda to William and back again. Part of him wanted to walk away from it all, to reject this tangled mess of emotions and move forward with his life as if nothing had changed. But another part of him, the part that had always longed for a sense of belonging, felt reluctant to let go. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, rubbing his hands together as if trying to wipe away the tension. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this." "Not yet." William gave a slow, understanding nod. "That's fair, but we have time, Michael. We'll go at your pace." The sincerity in the old man's voice surprised Michael. He had expected guilt, maybe even desperation, but what he heard was something simpler, an offer, not a demand. For the first time since the revelation, Michael allowed himself to breathe a little easier. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to figure this out, one step at a time. The silence that followed wasn't as suffocating as it had been earlier. It was still heavy, yes, but it carried a sense of possibility now, rather than finality. Michael looked over at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging smile, and then at Linda, whose eyes were filled with both hope and fear. Finally, he lifted his head and met William's gaze. "I don't know where this goes," he said quietly but firmly, "but maybe this is a start." William's expression softened with relief. "That's all I could ask for." The room exhaled collectively, as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for Michael to say those words. Sarah's hand squeezed his arm once more, and he gave her a small, tentative smile in return. Linda wiped her eyes again, sniffing quietly. "Thank you, Michael." He shrugged, his voice light but tinged with emotion. "Don't thank me yet. I'm still figuring all of this out." "We'll figure it out together," William said gently. Michael nodded, though uncertainty still lingered at the edges of his thoughts. He didn't know what the future held, or how long it would take to feel comfortable with these new truths. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: hope. And that was enough. Not everyone in the Anderson family was pleased with the new dynamic. While William and Michael were gradually rebuilding their bond, James watched everything unfold from the shadows, seething with resentment. Stripped of his place in the company and cast out from his father's trust, James could only sit back and observe as the life he once believed was as crumbled beyond repair. In his upscale apartment, anger simmered just beneath the surface. He paced the room like a caged animal, fists clenched at his sides, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table. His frustration finally boiled over when a notification pinged on his phone, a news article announcing Michael's official appointment as a partner at Anderson Tech. The headline might as well have been a dagger to James's pride. "So, that's it. He's really the old man's grandson," James muttered, the bitterness in his voice thick. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. No wonder he's been bending over backwards for him since day one. That little bastard stole everything. His hand shot out, knocking the bottle of whiskey to the floor with a crash. It rolled away as James grabbed a glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass filled the room, but it did nothing to ease the storm raging inside him. "All my life," he whispered to himself, gripping the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned white. "All my life, I've been second to Robert, and now to him? Some kid we didn't even know existed until a few weeks ago." Laura, who had been sitting silently on the couch, glanced up from her phone, her expression cold. "You should have seen it coming, James," she said flatly, her voice devoid of sympathy. "The moment that old man saw something in Michael, it was already over for you." James rounded on her, his eyes blazing. "Don't tell me what I should have seen. I've spent my entire life trying to earn my father's respect, and now..." His voice broke with fury. "Now everything I ever worked for is gone. And for what? Some charity case who didn't even know he was part of this family until last month." Laura leaned back, crossing her arms. "Well, it's done now. You lost." There was no malice in her tone, just an icy indifference that stung even more. James stared at her, breathing heavily, his fists still clenched at his sides. And then something shifted in his eyes, a cold gleam, something dangerous, like a man on the edge who had nothing left to lose. "I haven't lost yet," James whispered, more to himself than to Laura. His voice was eerily calm now, which made it all the more unsettling. Laura raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do? Throw another tantrum?" James gave a slow, twisted smile. "No, I'm going to finish what I started." Back at the Anderson mansion, Michael was slowly adjusting to the strange new reality of being part of a family he never expected to belong to. It was an awkward transition, but William's efforts to make up for lost time were sincere. There were awkward conversations, shared meals, and small gestures that felt foreign to Michael but comforting in their own way. One afternoon, William called him into the study. Michael sat in the same leather chair where so many conversations, accusations, apologies, revelations had taken place. But this time, William's expression was lighter, his eyes free of the burdens that had weighed on him for so long. "Michael," William began, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. "There's something I want you to have." Michael took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a formal letter on Anderson Tech letterhead, signed by William himself. As his eyes scanned the words, his heart skipped a beat. The document officially named him as a partner in the company, an equal, with a stake in the business and a future at Anderson Tech. "This is official?" Michael asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. William smiled warmly. "It always should have been. This company is as much yours as anyone else's. I want you to know this is where you belong." Michael stared at the letter for a long moment, his emotions swirling. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was validation. For the first time, He felt like he truly belonged, not just in the company, but in the family. Later that evening, Robert approached him with a rare look of approval. The oldest Anderson son wasn't one for emotional speeches, but his words carried weight. "You're doing good work, Michael," Robert said. "I wasn't sure at first, but I think my father was right about you. I'm glad you're here with us." Michael gave a small, appreciative nod. "Thanks, Robert. That means a lot." And then there was Sarah. She had been by his side throughout the whole ordeal, from the accusations to the revelations, and her quiet support had been one of the few constants in Michael's turbulent journey. Their relationship had grown steadily, their connection deepening with every challenge they faced together. One evening, they found themselves sitting on the back patio of the mansion, the world quiet around them. Sarah glanced over at Michael, a soft smile on her lips. "I think you finally found your family," she said gently. Michael smiled back, though the weight of everything still lingered in his mind. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think so too." But even as he spoke the words, a sense of unease settled in the back of his mind, like the low hum of distant thunder. As much as he wanted to believe that the worst was behind him, something told him that James wasn't done. And whatever James was planning, Michael knew it wasn't going to end peacefully. James Anderson wasn't going to fade quietly into the background. Defeated, humiliated, and cut off from everything he believed was rightfully his, he plotted one final, desperate move. If he couldn't regain control of Anderson Tech, he would make sure no one else, especially Michael, would enjoy it either. Revenge was his only lifeline now, and he clung to it with a fierce determination that bordered on madness. Over the next few days, James activated every shady connection he had left. Former business partners, old contacts who owed him favors. He reached out to anyone willing to help. He bribed his way into obtaining confidential company documents and began manipulating them. Carefully, methodically, he fabricated an elaborate scheme to frame Michael, making it appear as though his newfound half-brother had been orchestrating financial fraud from the inside. If James couldn't have Anderson Tech, he would burn it to the ground, and Michael's reputation with it. The plan began unfolding early one morning. Whispers spread across the office floors of Anderson Tech like wildfire. Staffers glanced at each other nervously, hushed conversations buzzing in break rooms. The name Michael Johnson was at the center of it all, his rapid rise to the company now painted in a sinister light. It didn't take long for emails to circulate, hinting at his involvement in fraudulent activities. By the time William Anderson's phone rang, the rumors were already threatening to spiral out of control. The caller was Thomas Brown, the same man who had betrayed the Anderson family before, but now saw an opportunity to leverage information to save his own skin. "William," Thomas said, his voice low and urgent. "James is behind this mess. I don't know how he pulled it off, but he's framing Michael. If you don't act fast, it's all going to come crashing down." William closed his eyes briefly, frustration building inside him. He had hoped cutting James out of the business would end the drama, but the nightmare refused to end. "Where is he?" William asked coldly. Thomas chuckled darkly on the other end of the line. "Waiting for the fallout, I imagine. Thinking you'll turn on Michael, just like last time." But William had no intention of being manipulated again. "Thank you, Thomas," William said quietly, ending the call. Then, with a heavy heart, he summoned Michael, Sarah, Robert, and James to his study. When they were all seated in the dimly lit office, William leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. James sat smugly across from him, his arms draped over the armrest as if he were already celebrating his victory. "So," James said with a smirk, "finally figured out the truth, huh? I told you Michael was trouble from the beginning." William's eyes didn't waver. His expression was calm, but his voice was ice. "You really think you've won, don't you?" James shrugged, his grin widening. "I'm just doing what should have been done from the start, protecting what's mine. He doesn't belong here, Dad. I'm your son, not him." Michael, who had been holding himself back, clenched his fists. The anger simmering inside him threatened to boil over, But when James's smug gaze landed on him, something inside Michael snapped. He shot to his feet, his voice sharp with frustration and exhaustion. "I never wanted to take anything from you, James." Michael's voice cracked as he stood in front of his half-brother, his eyes filled with anger. "All I ever did was try to do the right thing. But you destroyed yourself. No one else did that. You did." James scoffed bitterly. "Don't act like some martyr, Michael. You waltzed in here and took everything I worked for, and now you want to play the victim." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "What's next? Are you going to drag this family through the mud to protect your place here?" Sarah stood abruptly, her expression steely. "Enough, James." She walked to the desk, dropped a thick folder of documents in front of William, and flipped it open. "These are all the records we found," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear. "Every illegal transaction, every fraudulent deal. They all point to you, James. And this time, there's no getting out of it." Michael and Daniel had spent days piecing together everything. Emails, altered contracts, shell companies. And it all pointed directly to James. The room was silent except for the soft rustling of paper as William reviewed the evidence. James's smug expression faltered for the first time. "You," James stammered, leaning forward. "You forged those documents. This isn't real." His voice grew louder, more desperate. "No, James," Michael said, his tone low and resolute. "This is all you. You left a trail, and we found it." William closed the folder, his hands heavy against the cover. His expression was one of quiet devastation. Not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that there was no redemption left for his son. "You had every chance, James," William said softly, his voice heavy with regret. "Every opportunity to do the right thing. And you threw it all away." James slumped back in his chair, his face pale. "You're really going to choose him over me?" he whispered bitterly, his voice filled with disbelief. William's gaze never wavered. "You chose this path, not me." There was no grand exit, no dramatic outburst as James stood and walked toward the door. For the first time, he looked truly defeated, like a man who had lost everything, even his will to fight. "You're done, James," William said quietly as his son reached the threshold. "You will have no place in this family or this company ever again." James paused for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe, but he didn't turn around. Without another word, he left the room and the Anderson legacy behind for good. With James gone, the house seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had lingered for far too long. William sat heavily in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the years of pain and mistakes. "Thank you," William said softly, looking at Michael, "for staying, for believing in this family. Even when we gave you every reason not to." Michael gave a small nod. "I guess it was worth it." Sarah smiled beside him, her hand brushing against his. "It definitely was." In the weeks that followed, peace settled over the Anderson family for the first time in years. Michael and Sarah's relationship flourished, their partnership in the company growing into something deeper. Together, they dreamed not only of leading Anderson Tech into a new era, but also of building a life together beyond the walls of the office. Daniel, ever the loyal friend, was brought on board as a consultant, a move that sealed his and Michael's friendship for life. Meanwhile, William made it his personal mission to rebuild his relationship with Linda. They spent long afternoons reminiscing about the past, both determined to make up for lost time. One day, over tea in the garden, William took her hand and said, "You'll never have to worry about anything again, Linda. I'll make sure of that, for you and for our grandson." Linda smiled, a quiet peace settling over her heart. "It's all I ever wanted," she whispered. Michael's journey had begun with a simple act of kindness, helping a stranger on the street without knowing how deeply it would alter his life. That single moment had led him through betrayal, intrigue, and heartbreak. But in the end, it had also brought him love, purpose, and the family he never knew he needed. Life didn't always follow the path we expected, Michael realized. But sometimes, the unexpected turns were the ones that led to exactly where we were meant to be. And as he stood on the threshold of this new chapter, surrounded by those he loved, with a future bright with possibility, Michael knew one thing for certain. A small act of kindness could change everything. And it had. If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.